Are you a pro wrestling fan? Then odds are at some point in your life, you were a backyard wrestler. In this new series, I'm going to take you through how we came from this to this. It's a long story, covering nearly 2 decades. But if you're a nostalgic person missing the backyard days of yesteryear and a simpler time of the 90s and early 2000s, this is the story for you. This is Backyard Wrestling Cinema. Welcome to Backyard Wrestling Cinema, Season 2, Episode 9. On our last episode, we saw the introduction of a few new names, and on this episode, we'd actually see the introduction of new filming techniques as well. Backstage promos and interviews had been a part of the show since pretty much the very beginning, but this particular show was one of the very first times we used a vignette. The difference between vignettes and promos or interviews are typically the vignettes you don't acknowledge the camera. It's almost as if the camera's not there. Over the years, our vignettes would advance to the point where we would acknowledge the camera, but it was all done in like almost an acting sort of way where you were not cutting a promo to the camera, you were kind of talking one-on-one to another person. And then as I said, as the years went on, we just started to break the fourth wall a bit and acknowledge that the camera was there. But these early vignettes were much like how they were supposed to be. We weren't acknowledging the camera. Our first match saw the PR Kids taking on Cobain.
And now they're just starting to pummel down on Cobain.
Now, the PR Kids, that stood for the Punk Rock Kids, even though they came out to emo music and not punk rock.
Cobain firing back. 12 gauge. He hit one. Oh, 12 gauge again. Both better knock that 1, 2, 3, and your winner, Cobain.
Cobain got the win in this one, and we were doing a storyline where I, as my character Denver Street, was trying to get rid of Cobain from the company. He was just somebody that irritated me, and I just didn't want him there for whatever reason. Our next match saw Slug, one of our original members, taking on TLD. Now, there was real-life heat between these two, so much so that in high school, these two actually got into a confrontation, and as they were being pulled apart by the teachers, Slug tried to throw a punch at TLD, who we all called Fluff. He just didn't have the reach on it, so the punch kind of connected to TLD's chest and kind of came up a little bit, so it was just this weird like S kind of curve punch, and we all called it the suspension hook because he ended up getting suspended for that really weak punch. And in this one, Slug got his first victory in a number of months, defeating TLD. Tommy Thunder was up next, and he would take on somebody called Biohazard, and this is the first and only time you will see Biohazard here. I actually reached out to Tommy Thunder as I was putting this episode together, and neither one of us have any idea who that guy was. He was a one-timer that Tommy Thunder met in high school. I remember that much. I don't remember his real name. Tommy Thunder was 1 grade above me, so I didn't go to school with this guy. We went to the same school, but we were in different grades. Also, what's relevant in this match was the debut of The Beast, somebody who would become a fixture for B4W for a number of years and would create quite a controversy several years later.
In the end here. Uh-oh. Oh, he's going for it. Oh, yeah, the lightning bolt. 1! Oh, no. 1, 2, 3, and your winner!
After Tommy Thunder got the win, we did an angle where he had mutual respect with Rico DMF, the current unified champion. And that would be important because the main event would feature a tag match between the two.
Great match.
Thank you.
I'm watching the show. I know we went through it all. We did. This one title, but
I got a new one. I'm good.
obviously you're not with Denver Street anymore, so you're not the son of a Blum that I thought you were. You're okay in my book. And that's the ladder match we just had. You earned a lot more. You earned my respect.
Thank you, sir. And you've earned mine too. I'm gonna go recuperate now.
See you later, Tommy.
Speaking of Rico DMF, the current unified champion, he took on Mumbles.
Mumbles, that status has got to injure.
But the new high rollers, TJ Money and Mr. Benjamins, would come out and interfere and interrupt this match.
High rollers! The rest of the high rollers! Take it out, Rico DMF! Oh, how about boost from Kobe?
Myself and Slug, we were kind of doing this angle at the time of being the foundation of B4W because we were original members. and we took on the Punk Rock Kids, and this was the last appearance of the PR Kids.
The street sweeper. That should be it. 1, 2, 3. Your winner, Denver Street. The new alliance of him.
They left because they complained that they were always losing, and I had a general rule: if you're new, it's going to be a while before you win. And maybe it's not the best way to keep people, but I wanted to see that people were there to be a part of the show and that wanted to actually wrestle. Because believe it or not, there's a ton of people who just want to go to a wrestling show to hold up belts, and they don't care about anything else. They don't care about making the show better. They're in it for themselves. And I mean, I guess that's fine for some people. I was never okay with that, even at 16, 17 years old, whatever I was at the time. So they were upset they weren't winning, and I told them, well, that's not likely to change for a long time. Just being honest with them. And they said, well, then we're going to quit. And I said, well, we'll see you later. And that was the last we ever saw of them. I honestly don't even think I ever talked to them again. And at the time, they lived right across the street from where my girlfriend lived. And I don't think I ever spoke to them ever again. They were so upset about me not caring that they were quitting.
Mumbles, you were sent out here to do one simple task. You were supposed to push Rico off the porch and beat him down. You couldn't even do that.
After the High Rollers attacked Rico DMF, we did a thing where TJ Money was angry at Mumbles because the whole plan was TJ Money wanted Mumbles to take out Rico DMF, the current world champion. TJ Money was currently the #1 contender for the World Championship, or the Unified Championship as we were calling it at the time. So he wanted a really weakened opponent for our pay-per-view. It's also funny because TJ Money actually dressed like Dynamic Danny in this, and I think it was really unintentional, but we all gave him so much for it.
Hopefully the canoe does not get involved in this match. Get off the canoe. Hitting it with the microphone, the vocal piece of Mumbles. Oh, right into the tree. If anybody knows hardcore, it's Mumbles. And there he goes, going after my canoe. Oh, pull up his hands, TJ. Oh, throw him on my canoe.
It was a hardcore title match, and it was one of those brawling all over the backyard kind of things. Now, at the time, we had a rule about the canoe. Rico had this canoe in his backyard. Rico was also known as Ricky. So him and his dad had these plans for this canoe, and he would get really upset when people would use it because he didn't want it to get ruined and then ruin the plans for him and his dad. And Mumbles had this thing about never listening to Ricky and would go out of his way to use the canoe in almost every single match. And in this one, he almost broke it, which really pissed off Ricky.
TJ locking him in for, yep, the roll of dice. That should be it. TJ hit his finishing maneuver. 1, 2, 3, and TJ Money is your victor.
TJ Money would walk away as the hardcore champion, and he was still the #1 contender for the B4W championship. Rico DMF would team up with Tommy Thunder, as I mentioned earlier, and they would take on the High Rollers of TJ Money and Mr. Benjamins. At this time, there was starting to be friction between myself and Rico DMF in real life. I felt he was sort of leaning towards the side of all the newcomers and wasn't really a part of the original HWF guys like myself, Slug, Tommy Thunder. Now in real life, he was friends with all those guys. I mean, those are the guys he hung out with all the time. We were wrestling in Rico's backyard. This was Ricky's backyard. I alternate between saying Rico and Ricky. It was his backyard we were wrestling at, and I was the one putting together the show. Now, the show was actually in Rico's name because he was 18 at the time and I was not. And we would alternate editing. And I started to feel like he was editing stuff out that he shouldn't have been and putting in stuff that shouldn't have been there. Immature and mundane, things that don't matter. But when you're 16, 17, that stuff does matter, I guess. And the one thing that really drove me nuts was that everybody's title, like the lower thirds graphic, which had everybody's name, was about this big for everybody, except Ricky's, which was like half the screen. And again, that's us being inexperienced and not knowing what we're doing, but it started to build this like real life resentment between me and Ricky that, you know, had never been there and hasn't been there since. After Tommy Thunder and Rico got the win.
Set him up here. It looks like lightning bolt. Don't know Rico's name. Oh, balls! It could be on 1, 2, 3. Now we got the cover.
I came out afterwards and hit him with a clipboard. Pay attention to that clipboard because behind the scenes, that clipboard almost ended our TV show forever. There's so much more to this story, and we're going to get to it all in the next couple episodes. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, for TJ money. All right, TJ money. Oh, a shot with the garbage can. Oh, they're grabbing him with a right around the joint. Huge choke slam, nice, baby.